Hi guys. Hang on, cause turn back on. Cripe's sake. I either need a new USB mouse or a new USB hub or both. But hi everyone. Good morning. Hello. I totally forgot to put on Sirenscape, so we have something on in the background, and here's Lauren.
I'm gonna go to the bathroom.
It's fine. It's fine. I just turned things on because I was happily listening to the theme music, or not the theme music, the fan art loop music, because it's really good. Lauren will be right back.
Why did I take my shoes off?
I don't know.
I
don't know. Okay. Hi! Lauren will be back momentarily. Yeah, well, you know, she didn't have time to do that while she was fighting Mario and Luigi. I don't know why she was fighting Mario and Luigi. Don't ask. I'm going to wait for her to get back, and then I will go and turn on Sirenscape so we have a little bit of background audio. Wizard needs food badly. No. I hope that's not... Yeah. Hi, hello. Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, good day, good evening, good day-night cycle. I don't know. But here we go. We are on, I have to learn how to do this little bit, because this is going to be a part of my RPG show, and I have to do it. So, this is Behind the Screens with myself and Lauren, who will be right here momentarily. Where we talk about how to be better GMs, basically, with the focus on preparing me, at least for now, with preparing me on, or for starting my D&D 5th edition show here on GeekSpaceTV. And GeekSpaceTV is, why can't you hear me? I don't know. But GeekSpaceTV is a non-profit online broadcasting studio dedicated towards bringing you more representation, diversity, and inclusion in gaming and geek spaces. Hi. I brought my homework.
Oh, yeah!
Fair warning, very gooey. That's why the paper towels are there.
I like it.
The recipe for the frosting was poorly written.
Oh no.
So it basically, it's like, okay, puree the raspberries, and then strain them through a sieve to get all the seeds out and whatnot. And then in a mixing bowl, add powdered sugar. That was the second step.
Yeah.
Which tells me, put it in the mixer, add sugar. No.
Oh, no.
They didn't say set aside the raspberry, which is what they meant. But because of that, and I'm streaming, and you know, like, it's distracting.
Yeah.
So you're not like, that seems like a bad idea. Let me keep reading. So there you go. Don't write a plan. The players will destroy it. Well, you know, that's part of the fun. Anyway, random distractions to throw in into surprised introduction mode.
So, my adventure this morning was mostly me sitting in my hallway being like, I'm sorting out stuff, and then the plumber knocks on the door.
Stuff?
It was
you think I'm gonna let that one go?
Okay, I was sorting Disney Princess bandages into sizes, because I was like, I'm gonna separate, I have 3 boxes of them, and
I'm kind of disappointed. I thought you were separating by princess.
See, now I want to go do that.
Sorry.
But I wasn't. I was separating them by size so that I could make it make sense.
That's fair.
And then
that's
the plumber knocked. This was like 11 a.m.
I'm kind of disappointed.
And I had not showered or dressed. So then the plumber shows up, and I'm like, this will be fine. It'll take like an hour. It's probably, like snake it, and then it'll be good. And then it's 2 p.m. and he was still there. And he was tearing into a wall when I left, because apparently it was that bad. So cool.
Yeah.
Oh, I could separate by princess and then by size.
I told them all that you were fighting Mario and Luigi.
That is also plausible. I did have to sit next to the cat for a little while because there was a lot of noises, and I was like, I feel like this is traumatizing for the cat. But I was remaining in hope until about 1 p.m. when he started tearing into the wall that I would be able to, use my shower. And get dressed without a stranger in my apartment, and that was not the case. So I hid in a corner and got changed. And it's like, this This is my life now. But I'm here. I felt bad for the cat.
Yay! I didn't even get a chance. Like I don't know if they can hear me right now, but I was going to stall by doing like studio Q&A stuff, but I didn't even get to that point.
You can still do that if you want.
Bugbear battle. No, I don't want to do that. Which one? Abandoned lunatic asylum. That one makes sense.
That does sound accurate. I think I normally do like the friendly tavern. Anna is not next to the mic right now, Quasi, so that would explain why you can't really hear Anna right now. So hi everybody, welcome. Anna has broken things. That doesn't seem likely, but we're going to talk today about more world building, but specifically geography, because that was a thing that we discussed a lot last time and needed to be fleshed out more today.
Oh,
so,
I have stuff to talk to you about.
Perfect. So if you are new to Behind the Screens, this is a show wherein I teach Anna how to GM because she apparently doesn't know how to be a good GM. So, meow or mew? Are we making maps? We will probably be making a map. Whether it ends up being the final map is hard to say. Do you have you have a big piece of paper? Maybe?
No.
No, okay.
That is definitely not what that is.
Oh.
Sorry.
Disappoint. No, it's fine.
Sorry. I did sketch out a brief map.
Cool.
But what I have to talk to you about is Friday.
Yes.
Since Right Click is not going to be able to meet.
This is true.
I keep telling everyone it's because, and I quote, Lauren is bad at schedules. Or bad at reading a calendar. That's what it was.
I am bad. Because I didn't read the calendar
There's
when I
no
did this.
cable in the camera, right? There wasn't. Now there is, because I turned it.
No, wrong one. It's purple.
No,
one.
this was in the camera too.
Oh, I didn't see it. Huh? That works.
It wasn't before, but I turned the camera because to line us up with our little nameplates and stuff. Thank you, Fire Raven. Also, for the mods, I do have the mod chat in Discord open, so I can see that right now. So since Right Click can't meet on Friday, guess who is? We're not streaming it.
No, that's fair.
Sorry.
That makes sense.
I need to
Is this your pre-episode? Like this is
the
your pre-meeting?
first time everybody will have gotten
Okay.
together. We're gonna talk about like everything and figure out characters, people's places in the world, goals, and where everyone comes from, that sort of a thing. So
That's awesome.
I totally wanted to be like, okay, what should I talk to them about?
Yeah.
Like, so
That seems like a
thought,
good thing.
I know that you probably had an idea of where we would go with today, but I think at the very least covering, good questions to ask, good things to bring up during that first session would be really well timed and a good topic.
This is awesome. So, because I don't think making a map will take all of today anyway, so we can do kind of a halvesies where we work on like getting you some geography and then talk about what are things to discuss at your first meeting with your players and what maybe are things you should like give to them now before Friday so they have like 2 or 3 days to look at them. Session 0, first meeting. It's not even session 0. Session 0 to me is like a session where you're actually rolling dice, where you're doing it in the structure.
I don't know who.
Oh, Steph.
Yeah, why was Kitty sad?
I think
why
it
was Sailor
supposed to
Moon
be a bird.
Kitty sad?
I think it's supposed to be a bird.
It's a little tiara.
No, I see
It's a
Sailor
little tiara,
Moon Kitty.
right?
Yeah.
Sailor Moon Kitty. That's what that is. And I don't know why Sailor Moon Kitty is sad, but I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Sailor Moon Kitty. Go ahead.
So this is to me more of a meeting. I try not to like peg it as a specific session, and it's just like part of the pre-session meetings.
We'll
because
only have a few hours. Yeah. We're not going to have time to actually role play at all. Yeah. It'll be deciding connections and things like that.
And there's also the likelihood is we can talk. Do you want to start with that, or do you want to start with working on a map? What would you prefer?
Oh, whatever.
Well, now that we're talking about it, let's just do it.
Okay.
Okay. So, things to think about in terms of a pre-meeting. Let me get my notebook out and my pencil. Can you give me a little bit of context of like what have you told besides telling them to read Rat Queens? Like what information have you given them about?
That's pretty much it. No.
Okay.
Mostly the concept of mundane magic being a little bit pervasive and localized to that city. Because I feel like that is an overall like character setting thing, and by character setting I mean character of the world, not characters, individual characters. I mean it tells us a lot about the world. How does magic sculpt the world's geography? I was actually thinking about that when I was doing a quick sketch. And I want to emphasize that this was a quick sketch while I was doing 2 other things.
Good.
So, yeah.
Good.
Yeah. But I was actually thinking about how overall I want the terrain to have been naturally created, but there are going to be elements that are completely fantastical in nature, so or at least implausible, or yeah, I don't know. But yeah, mostly it's going to be naturally geographical.
So back
instead
to
of national.
Natural. Yeah. No, I follow.
Yeah, right.
So back to what you've talked to the players about already.
Yeah.
You set them up to read Rat Queens. Did you give them any guidance when you asked them to read Rat Queens, or was it just saying it's going to be Rat Queens inspired, read this, and then kind of whatever your takeaway is, what your takeaway is? Or did you direct them a little bit more to read about, like...
Mostly it was the elements of how they're not heroes, but they are heroes.
Okay.
And how they're people, as well as trying to save the world occasionally and live their lives and things like that. It was that sense of there is somewhat pervasive mundane magic in Rat Queens, and it's not a comedy, but the people are funny, if that makes sense. It's not that they're constantly set up in hilarious scenarios. It's that they have wisecracks when people would make wisecracks and things like that. So we had those sorts of conversations. And it was mostly that I want, it's one of my rules in life that everybody reads Rat Queens. So it was an excuse to be like, you're going to read Rat Queens.
You're going to follow the rules.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I did prior to having a first meeting with the crew of Leviathan is I did a chunk of the world building. But I also wrote a document that was just like a very brief introduction to the setting, and the kind of tones that I was going for. So whether you want to formalize it in any sort of document or just like post it in the Discord, I would recommend kind of making sure they know some of the...
Sorry, hang on. Apparently volume is low. Alright. It's funny because apparently that monitor can be seen clearly. Well, that's not what I want up there. It's fine.
Oh, is it in the mirror?
Keep
No.
talking.
What? Okay. Oh, it's on the clock. So one of the things that I kind of gave to them is, one, I gave them like a list of inspirations, like what were the tones and what were the media sources that I was pulling from and generating it. But I gave them all of this information up front before we even had the first session, because before we got to a meeting, I wanted them to have a character kernel in mind, whether it was a fully fledged concept or whether it was just I am partial to this sort of character. I wanted them to be able to come to that first meeting with it, which I would recommend you doing given you have a limited amount of time on Friday. So whenever you have a limited amount of time to meet with players, it's good to front load stuff so that they can take information, process it, and then come, rather than like having this sort of long stretch silence where you're all being like, what sort of thing am I interested in doing? I don't know. So you can give them an opportunity to think about those things in advance. But so I can give you kind of the list of when you get back here. What?
Sorry.
No.
One more minute.
So related to that, what else? You're going to want to talk about some of those things then again. I'm looking at chat. Good enough?
I just want a GeekSpace graphic up there. If there's going to be a graphic just reflected in this, it shouldn't be my logo. It should be GeekSpace's, but whatever. I don't want to spend too much time working on that.
Yeah, there's a reason why I called this GMing, it's TTRPG 201. This isn't 101. This is 201. This might actually be 30401, depending on how you want to think about it.
Why?
Because I think GMing is something that should normally be done after you've been a player.
That's fair.
Because then you have more of a feel for what you liked and what you didn't like, and what works, and you have less of a cognitive burden as a player than you do as a GM. That being said, some people may not like being a player and may only like being a GM, and vice versa. But I think generally, if you have never played an RPG before, I would never recommend you becoming a GM before you have tried being a player.
No, that's fair. It's GMing 101, but...
Well, there's a reason it's TTRPG.
Yeah.
201.
Yeah.
301
that's
is
what I'm
writing your
saying.
own
That's
system.
the difference. Yeah.
That's the difference. So it's...
I think 301 is a little after, right? Like, I mean,
The
301
graduate
is a
one.
little before writing your own
fair.
system.
Fair. Is that the graduate level course?
I think it might be, yeah. Snacky Bear, no snacks. Snacky Bear, thank you so much for that donation. Nothing to see here.
I'll just have to cover it up so I can only see chat.
It's fine.
So what Trooper is saying is giving kind of the players a pitch paragraph before. So setting up the world, the campaign, and what sort of characters would be appropriate. It really doesn't need to be more than a paragraph or a few sentences, but having something for them to mull over between now and the meeting on Friday would be really helpful.
Yeah.
For a lot of them, especially knowing some of your players, they are thinkers and not necessarily always snap decision makers. They're not like I have those. Like I have a Claudia who is just like, I will make an idea and I will run with it. And I think Drunkly is kind of similar. But then like other characters like Cheryl will spend a lot more time and be thinking a lot more than like grabbing something and running away with it.
Yeah. I think we did already have a little bit of that conversation. The problem is a lot of it happened a while ago.
Mm-hmm.
So it's difficult for me to be sitting here on the spot remembering what was talked about because it all happened individually too. Like I've had this conversation 4 times and it was different all 4 times. So
which is why I suggest sending it to everyone. So A, they all have the same information, and B, it's fresh. Like it's happening now as opposed to whatever you talked about in the past.
Yeah. That is a very good idea. Yes. Yes, I should do that.
It's paragraph. We can work on it today
No,
too. Like that's something that we can come up with. So I would have your kind of your pitch paragraph that you sent to the players before the meeting. In that, you'll want to kind of re-mention some of the things about the world, whatever you think are pieces that players should know about regardless of where their character is from. Like they would know about the Magic City. They would know about this, like a couple of highlights. Whatever, if you have a setup for them, like you are all part of a crew on a ship. Or I ran my very first campaign, I set it in a fantasy land where there was a university that had an adventuring course. And I was like, you're all like taking this adventuring course and you need to decide why you're majoring in adventuring.
Yeah.
And so that was the setup. Like that was how their guidance. So whatever piece you're going to give them to define or narrow their characters, like they have to have a reason for blank. And we can talk a little bit more if you have some ideas of what sort of I don't want to say rails because they're not really rails, but like
they should at least start near some rails.
Yeah.
And then how much they ignore them is dependent upon the players. But yeah, no, I see what you're saying. I see what you're saying.
If you had any thoughts right now on like a one sentence description, like you are all here because of blank, or you are the sort of person who would blank, or you need to be a character that is willing to.
Yeah, I have mentioned that they should all be people who will do the right thing because it's the right thing to do. That they should be, even if they do it grudgingly, they should be the kind of people that do the right thing because it needs to be done and not necessarily for money. Which doesn't mean that they have to be a goody two-shoes, lawful good, happy-go-lucky hero who doesn't need to get paid. It just means that, like, if the world has to be saved and somebody has to save it, then they'll be like, ugh, okay, and do it. They're heroes, but D-list heroes, kind of, yeah. Potentially, anyway.
What other guidelines would you give to them? Do they need
Don't
to
be
have...
Batman. That is
I have really
that
strong
is
opinions against
TTRPG
Batman.
101. Don't be Batman.
What do you mean by that?
I mean,
'Cause I
have
think I know,
something you
but-
care about. Have family. Don't be an orphan. Don't be dark and brooding all the time, and a loner who works by themselves. And don't be Batman.
I would also add to that, the loner piece is always a very difficult one and a very fine line that you can walk as a player in a tabletop RPG, but you are setting yourself to struggle more because the vast majority of roleplay games you're going to do are inherently collaborative.
Yep.
And playing a character that refuses to collaborate...
I would say you have to be a darn good role player to be able to pull that off, do that well in a collaborative campaign. So while if that's your jam, if that's the character you want to play, by all means, go play it somewhere else. That isn't something that I want to GM or even deal with as another player.
So you're looking, some of the guidelines, I'm going to break that down into collaborative, or at least cooperative, are something you're going to want them to make in their NPCs.
Now people are getting nitpicky about who Batman is. Like, you get what I'm saying. I know that Batman has had 80 billion different variations, and some of them he had family in. I'm aware. However, you get the point.
I don't like Batman.
Quasi, that's up to you.
Yeah.
If you want to deal with evil characters, that's on you. I don't. I'm not interested in that. I'm not interested in seeing evil stories. I think we covered it last week when I said there's enough evil in the world already. I don't need it in my RPGs.
Yeah. You're also looking for...
Or in my player parties, at any rate.
You want characters to have things that are important to them.
So, okay, and this is something that people also usually say when I say don't be Batman. Can I be Superman instead? Yes, and let me explain why. Superman, even though he's an orphan, he was adopted by an incredibly loving, caring family that he cares deeply for. He has things he loves. Even though he's a bit of a Mary Sue, he has things that he cares about. He has that vulnerability, even though he's OP. Yeah, you can be Superman if you want.
I mean, by the time you're
okay
a
with
20th
that.
level character, you are
You
basically
pretty much
Superman.
are, yeah. So there you go.
Okay. So what? Let's
Focusing.
No. We're getting a list
I have
of sort
strong
of
feelings about this.
guidelines. So these are all the things you've given me: being the kind of people who do the right thing, being collaborative, being or cooperative at least, willing to work with others, are very they're really good guidelines, but also very high level guidelines, and they're not specific to your world or setting. What sort of world-based ties would you give your players? So an example, in Leviathan, I said that they all needed to be on this merchant ship, and they had to have a reason for being there. They all had to be part of this university program. Like Shadowrun is easier because you all have to be Shadowrunners, like that's your setup. The right click, they are adventurers, I think I just gave them the very simple, like, you're adventurers who are going to take a job. Like,
Yeah.
it can be as simple as that, or it can be a little bit more complicated. What sort of world guidelines might you have for your players?
I think that's a bit trickier for me.
Okay. Then we'll put it on a thing to think more about.
I mean,
What's your
overall,
gut
we need to figure out why they're in this town that they're in, and where they want to go after that town. I definitely want, again, non-world specific, but they need to have goals. I think it was actually Trooper, who was a guest last week, and I believe is in chat and is one of our mods, was saying on Twitter that your player characters should have short-term, medium-term, and long-term goals. At least one of each. And I feel like that helps figure out who that person is. And that is definitely something that I want. Everybody's got to have goals.
Mm-hmm.
Even if their goal is to figure out what they want to do with their lives. That's a goal. But again, not world-specific. So.
And asking the question of, like, why they're in the town, your brief to them. Okay, so here's another question for setup. Are they going to have been a group prior to the first session or not?
That is something I want them to decide.
Okay.
There has to be some degree of interconnectedness amongst them, but they don't all have to know each other already. Two of them can know each other, and the other two can know each other. And
so that feeds into the idea of why they're in the town. Because if you have players who know each other beforehand and they are there as a party, then you need the whole reason why the group has gone to this town. If they're there as smaller individuals, then they can each come up with their own independent reason for being in that town.
Mm-hmm.
And that, if you're wanting player input on, means that the players can also have some input as to why they would be in the town.
Yeah.
What I would suggest, though, to help them with that, is think about what are reasons people might come to this town.
Yeah.
So that if they're like, I don't know, you can be like, well, people come to this town for blah, 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 blah. Like, it's a passing point. It's a way to pass through. It's got rumors of X, Y, and Z. Whatever that is, then they can kind of draw from that as to why they might be there as an individual.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Based on what you told me with as few spoilers as possible, it has rumors, but does it have scandals? What are a couple of things you could think of for why someone might be in this town?
Mostly it's passing through is
Okay.
the only thing that I can think of. But at the same time, I feel like this place is kind of out of the way. So it's tricky. In all of the worst thing, because I realized as I'm sitting here, I didn't figure out where on the map this adventure is taking place.
Cool. That'll feed into the
Yeah.
map portion that we'll get to.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so things to
Gotta
think
figure
about
that
is there could be something special about this town. Maybe one of the, like, relatives are always useful. Like, someone in
Yeah.
the town could have a relative there, or a player. Something special could be pastries, could be an obscure ruin in the area, could be a holdover from the geography, the mining portion of the town. Just talked about it being a mining town. Also fun to generate potential rumors about this town. What are things people may have heard about it? And that's something you can ask for some player input too.
Pumpkin asks, do player artifacts warp the local geography?
Powerful.
What did I say?
Player.
Oh, yeah, powerful. There might be a spot in this. I hesitate to call it an artifact, but powerful magics can, and I think generally speaking probably should to a degree, at least in this world, they very much, if there's a powerful enough concentration of magic, it can, and left to its own devices, will warp the geography to a degree. Yes.
Could be an pilgrimage for the worship of the pastry deity.
It's not that big of a town. I'm actually more picturing it being a large village than a full-fledged town.
Mm-hmm.
Because if it was a full-fledged town, there would be no reason to hire these people. There'd be better equipped people to hire. And maybe it's near a larger town, like an actual town, and this is just kind of an outlying village to it, like that wouldn't be able to exist on its own without the full town. But which makes it more difficult to figure out why they're all there. But
yes and no. I mean, I think it's okay if those reasons are contrived, but they just need to have a reason.
yeah.
If they don't know each other before the first session, how are you going to I guess, how do you get them all into the group? And do you have a thought on that, or?
I guess what I'm taking away from our conversation today is that I've given them too much freedom in creating their characters and making it more difficult instead of easier for them to come up with ideas and concepts potentially. Because I've just been like, let me know what you want to do, and then we'll figure out how to connect you into the story. And maybe that's a little too much freedom in that way. But we'll see on Friday, I guess, to a degree.
Yes and no. I'd say, I mean, there's very easy ways. You've kind of given yourself a pretty simple way of getting them all into the group, which is that this is a small enough town. There's not that many people looking for jobs. They can be the only people who take this job.
Yeah.
But even if they only take it as individuals, that's not enough. So the person's like, you're a group now. You're going to all have to work together because you're going to need 4 of you to go do this job. And it can be as simple as that. But it sounds like they need to be people who would be taking a job and would be in this small, out-of-the-way mining town. Are there any more guidelines you would want to give to them in terms of where they might be from, or that's the place you want to leave it kind of to them?
I would say, generally speaking, they can't be from too terribly far away, because then they would be higher level, probably. But that's, how far away is too far away? I don't know. Maybe they were really lucky and traveled with a really large caravan that was on its way, and so they didn't see any action on the way. It's possible, but I would say probably unlikely that they would be from too far away from this town. But tying back in with talking about maps, with geography a little bit today, I kind of realized that I have traveled the U.S. a lot. I've got a pretty good idea. I've lived in a variety of different areas in the U.S., and I've got a pretty good idea of the geography, the weather patterns, and the overall terrain of a lot of different areas of the U.S. So perhaps it should be roughly like the U.S. in so far as size and climates. So I kind of started to model it on that, sketched it out really quickly, and was like, okay, I'm going to need to stretch here and elongate there and develop up here a bit more. But I feel like that gave me a really solid place to start, because it let me see, well, Florida is basically swamp. We've developed it, but it's basically swamp. What if there's some swamp and some islands? What if we put, like, Hawaii here? So that gives a concept of scale that is more or less the known, somewhat civilized world for the player characters. I don't know.
You're going to enjoy, because that's very similar to the strategies that I've used to make maps.
Yeah. What do you know?
And
use it.
The Paladin, your question about will there be too much room? It's, I mean, one, if you look at like a map of Faerun, it's fucking huge, right? having a sense of scale
Can confirm basically swamp, right?
basically swamp. Having a sense of scale can be really useful when you know that geographically you have to have things that are important but are very, very far away. Like this big city is not close by, but it does have to exist, and it should have some sort of direction in relation to where they are.
Yeah.
So we'll talk about some of the way I like to build maps as essentially maps of requirement, which is like they're a room that is mostly unfilled until I need it to be filled. As opposed to working in like a Faerun map where it's just like, oh, what am I doing here? But I've used the map of Faerun has so much stuff in it. For those who don't know, Faerun is the map that comes with is the Dungeons and Dragons map, and it has so much stuff in it that I was like, this is a thing that I want. Like I ran a one shot where it's like I want them to go down into the Underdark, and I want it to be a place where someone would have like run away into the Underdark. And I was like, here, there's a big pit in the map. It's this town that's right next to it. So like, you can find what you need. The bigger the map is.
Does magically altered weather have far-reaching influences, or does the influence have some sort of dampening on it? Maybe a global enchantment or something. I mean, that's if you're asking in general, well, that's up to the GM to decide. If you're asking for my world in particular, generally speaking, if magic has altered the terrain, it has altered the climate, and that doesn't happen overnight. That happens very slowly and very gradually over time. So people like the locals aren't really going to know any different because they haven't been alive long enough, even if they're elves. Probably.
Maybe you have some weird thing that caused all the elves to like shorten their lifespan for a couple of generations. Elves have only recently started living for so long.
Poor Klingons.
We don't talk about that time.
That's actually a really interesting concept, that the idea that elves have only recently started living for a really long time.
And no one knows why. Or maybe they do.
Maybe they do.
The elves aren't telling.
But they aren't telling, yeah.
So it sounds like we've got a pretty good list of character setup stuff. The thing you're...
Oh, the Great Monkey. See, I have this open now so I can see when it happens. It's great. The Great Monkey. Today's words of wisdom from the Great Monkey are brought to you by the weird feeling you get when you wake up in the night to see two green cat eyes staring at you. And then you remember you don't have a cat. Get a cat.
It sounds
Thank you.
like an ad from Welcome to Night Vale.
Thank you very, very much, Great Monkey. Really appreciated.
Should tweet and retweet that we're live. You know, we've been live for 40 minutes.
I think I did that.
I didn't, because I was like, I'm not here yet.
I might have gotten distracted, so I'm going to make sure that I did. No, I did. Okay, good. Phew.
We're just doing it. So the list we have right now, twitch.tv/geek.
Our Green Paradox, the first suggestion there, local sheriff arrest them. Not going to do that. That was what Critical Role did. Just generally going to try and avoid doing, because no matter how long ago an idea I had, like, concocted was, if Critical Role did it, it's going to look like we're copying. So generally going to try and avoid that.
That's reasonable. What's the advantage of not doing D&D? I can't get away with whatever.
Yeah, well, do not tempt me to cancel this show and go with that other idea.
I really like that other idea, and I'm 100% on board with figuring out how to do it.
I kind of want to GM it, too.
I'm also 100% on board on that. You could do it during a break, you know, when you're supposed to be taking a break.
Yeah, but I feel like it warrants a full-on show. I love that we know what we're talking about.
It's a really good idea. Can I be a player in it?
Maybe?
Okay.
Maybe.
You have ideas of who you want?
Not fully fleshed out yet.
Cool.
But it's another show. We can't do another show right now.
Yep.
We just can't. We can't afford to. So, yeah. Sorry.
Behind the secrets.
But I will say, because I've said it on my own stream, it is Star Trek related. It is Star Trek related.
It's a very fun idea.
I love it. So anyway.
So the thing you need to send to your players is your kind of 3 to 5 sentence summary of the tone, the setting, and then I would also send them the guidelines that you're going to have for them.
Okay. Send players 3 to 5 sentence. What?
Summary of the tone and the setting. So that's going to be your things like, it's Rat Queen's inspired, there's mundane magic, it takes place in this big world, the world, this is the flavor of the world and what it's going to feel like. Not going to answer questions about this idea, but it's really good. Then the other thing you need to send them, continue writing your notes, is the pieces, the kind of the guidelines you have for them. And the list as you've given me is basically their Don't Be Batman, the people who do the right thing,
These are like rules for life.
Yeah.
Right now.
Do the right thing.
Don't be Batman. Do the right thing.
And be willing to take jobs or be looking for a job. This will be on your test.
Actually, they don't even have to be willing to take jobs. Because I told you a little bit,
Yeah,
like, I have a plan if they don't want to take the job.
that's fair. That is true. So you can put a question mark next to that one or cross it out. And the I would recommend they be the sort of player that's willing to take jobs even if it's not that one specifically, because my guess it is pushing forwards in your setup, they're going to be the sort of players
Be willing to take jobs at least eventually.
Yeah. It doesn't have to be that one specifically. They can still say no, but that at some point in the future that's going to be kind of your setup for some of the stories. It'd be like being like, I'm going to play a Shadowrunner that never does a Shadowrun. Be like, that makes my life very difficult. You can be like a Shadowrunner that won't work for specific corporations, or a Shadowrunner that doesn't take certain types of jobs, but you should probably eventually run some shadows.
Or at least jog them.
Yeah,
I mean, really.
yeah. Slowly saunter.
Yeah.
Slowly
Dim
saunter
the lights
through
and
the
jog,
darkness.
all right? Slowly saunter through the darkness. That's so much better than casting magic missile at it, let me tell you.
And then the last piece is a reason that they're in this town. And you can give them as much or as little detail now, or just say, that's something we're going to talk about at the meeting because I want your input. But knowing that they're going to have some reason to be in a small mining town in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah.
And that's like the information I would send to them up front. And then ask them to come with some ideas about maybe what race or class or type of background they're thinking of playing. And it can be as little or as much, because I know players who you can, in D&D you can kind of build your character in a lot of ways. You can be like, I really want to play this race. I want to optimize, so I'm going to play this class. Or I really want to play this sort of character, what class and race would make sense for them. And there's a lot of different ways they might want to approach it. So that
does tie in with another thing that I have told them, which is like when I picked people, and this pretty much goes for all of our shows. I'm not really interested in power gamers. This is a show. It should be about telling the story and about being entertaining and playing with each other, and at the very least, even if you're a power gamer, it should be second to that telling a story thing. Mm-hmm. Like, if you want to be a power gamer, that's fine, but you're not going to find this as fulfilling as, a Crunchy or GM or whatever.
So Dan, now we all know why Dan loves Leviathan. He's coming back!
Aww. But I feel like even Dan knows that the power gaming comes secondary
He does.
to the story, or he wouldn't have exited in the way that he did.
Yeah.
He would have been like, no, I'm going to take them all down. Let's do this. I got plenty of time. And then he would have wanted to figure out another more heroic way out. Like, that's the kind of thing that I'm talking
Actually,
about.
speaking
where
of, need to
it's-
sit down and have a very, not a long, but a conversation with him about what happened to Conrad. He's already sent me some, and I'm just delighted. He brings me great presents. And has great presents. Okay.
Well, our Green Paradox, they can't use Sword Coast stuff, because that's the one book I don't have right now.
That makes sense.
I have Xanathars. I have Volos. I'm even willing to potentially purchase the Tortle expansion thing if somebody really wants to be a Tortle. But I don't have
Tortle?
the Sword Coast. They're basically humanoid turtles. Right? In the one shot that I was a player on for Askren for Exploding Dice, I was trying to convince everybody that we should be a troupe of turtle bards.
So you were trying to be the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
Wait, hang on. Post-adolescent monk turtles.
That would
Mutant turtles.
Mutant
We wouldn't
turtles.
really have mutated. Maybe we were looking for mutation. I don't know. It would have been great, though. Would have been great, though.
Teenage Mutant Barbarian Turtles.
Yeah.
Yep. That would have been
Turtle
pretty
power,
great.
yeah.
Turtle power.
I didn't actually want that. I wanted to be bards. But then somebody said that, and I was like, I guess. I mean, I don't like that as much as, like, this roaming band of... Like, how adorable is that? A roaming band of little turtles playing instruments? That's amazing.
So you wanted to make the turtle version of the right click. Except actually all good in music. A turtle does sound like a type of pastry.
All bards, okay? All bards. Yeah.
Post-adolescent musical monk turtles. You could multi-class. You could all have like a level in
That's true.
monk. And then
That's true.
whatever levels and anything else that you wanted. So you are technically...
So anyway,
That
but that
Ninja
was
Turtle.
that was a while ago.
Okay. It's fine. So we've talked about the information to kind of give to your players in setup.
Yeah.
What are some of your goals to walk away with after Friday? What are you hoping to get out of it?
Optimistically, I'm hoping that we'll be ready for a session 0.
Okay.
Which means characters all made, interconnected, we figured out why they're in the area that they're in, and we are ready to set up a session 0 because we gotta get this show live. Especially as we find more delays for starting season 3. We've got to get a move on. Yeah.
So, knowing that, you will need to feel out from them how comfortable they are going to be working on characters independently, because that'll give you some guidelines as to how much you need to build characters together or how much help they're going to need building characters.
Yeah.
Based on knowing them, I don't think any of them have played Dungeons & Dragons before.
Nancy definitely
Nancy
has.
Okay.
I think most of them have played at least some, but maybe not. Yeah, I don't know.
So you may want to... That's a tricky one, because character generation can eat up a lot of time to build characters.
Yeah.
So you might need to balance how much time you're going to allow for actually building the characters, because that's going to be the biggest thing that will get in the way probably of jumping into a session 0.
Yeah.
Because I would always recommend players have a character sheet to roll with that's like pretty much done, because that'll give them the best bet about whether or not they want to change anything or need to change anything, or
Yeah.
to also learn their character sheet. So you want to think about that piece. It's hard to say. So generally speaking, in D&D, you can build a character and a concept almost independently. So you can do kind of a lot of the discussion and then like set aside the last hour for building characters. That may be an option. But I would say you're going to want to ask them just like how willing or comfortable they are, because if not, you may need to make time to meet individually or like in pairs.
Which we can do as needed.
So connections does sound like one of the big ones that you're going to want to talk about. And connections can be connections to each other, but they can also be connections to other people that might exist in the world. How much are you going to want them to flesh that out beforehand?
At least some. They need to not be Batman. They need to have some family or people that they care about in the world somewhere, and somewhere that they're from. They don't have to tell me all the details about where they're from, but they need to, at least it needs to be in the back of their minds percolating, and then they can let me know as they know stuff, and have that be an ongoing negotiation rather than a specific, like, all done now thing.
I've been lucky that I have players that that like to come up with those things and come up with them often on the fly. So I'm used to having very little information about the characters, and that becomes kind of part of the collaborative discussion, but it's not the only way to go about doing it. One of the tools that you might find helpful with coming up with the connections is one that I picked up from improv, and it's called Silly, Stinky, Sexy.
Okay.
And it sounds, so the concept in improv is that you play a scene and you have 3 people in the scene, and so you have 4 people in the scene, and so you decide if you find the other 3 people silly, stinky, or sexy, and you play the scene as if that's your primary feeling towards the other person. But it basically is a way to be, you can kind of generalize it a little bit more for roleplay, but it's a good way for them to instantly have a feeling and opinion about the other people in the group. So like silly would be like, I find you kind of charming or endearing, but I might also like look down on you or kind of feel patronizing or be patronizing towards you. Stinky would just be like, I really don't like you, and then sexy, and you know. Like, love, dislike is another one you can use, but it's a potential tool for people to come up with very quick feelings towards other people. So if anyone's struggling with how their characters might interact, you can kind of pull that one out. Keep nodding. Keep nodding. Connections, character generation, and then talked about their basic backstory. Do you anticipate them needing... Are you anticipating session 0 being the one where you're going to kind of go over the rules, or do you want to try and do some of that beforehand?
I think we will probably have to have that be when we go over the rules, but if we get really, really lucky with Friday night and getting characters made and stuff like that, then we can start going over them. I need to brush up on the rules because I haven't jammed D&D, not 5th edition before, so I definitely need to brush up on the rules myself, but they're really more like guidelines anyway, so...
Yeah, they pretty much are more like guidelines.
Right? Yeah.
At least from my perspective, I don't...
And I feel like, again, especially when you're doing a show, that trumps all to me. Is that story means more than any specific rule. So,
I think if you...
Not if you're being kept captive and need to be rescued. I'm pretty sure I'm keeping myself captive, so...
Good. Yeah. Good. No, wait, that's not good.
It's a problem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're not helping.
It's, wibbly wobbly, timey-wimey. It's tricky.
I'm gonna open the door and there's like another Anna standing out there. Just stay.
There's only one way to get this much work done, okay?
You could use the second Anna to get twice as much work done.
Yeah.
If she wasn't threatening to keep you in here. I think the goal, if an answer to your question, is the goal will be to try and start character sheets. Whether they are finished is another one. Sound like you were planning on having session 0 be level 1 and then session 1, the first episode, being level 2. Meaning that generating a level 1 character is a lot easier than generating any other level character. So that will help.
Yeah. And I feel like that gives us a little bit to figure out the rules and what the characters can do, and then, add to it in the session 1, but not a huge amount, so. Self-hostage taking princess.
That's a choice. What else? Do you have any other concerns, questions, things about the first meeting that you want to talk about?
I guess I just want to make sure that they're as prepared as possible. Because, this is me that we're talking about. So I want to make sure that they're all okay. And not left hanging because of a decision that I made or something I didn't do. Yeah.
You can also double check your the document. I sent it on my laptop, but I think there were a couple things we noted wanting some player input on, so you can always pull that up and generate some of that information. Are you prepared for an unbalanced party? I'm sure you are. I'm sure you're expecting it.
Yeah, like I've said before, I'm totally happy with if they all want to be wizards, if they all want to be clerics, if they all want to be whatever they all want to be. Like, they can be a totally unbalanced party. They can totally be a bard and 3 fans of the bard, and the bard can be the super powerful one, and they're just like, whatever. I'm not really worried about that.
If you're starting at level 1, what's the plan if someone dies?
They're just not going to.
Death is,
in particular, it's a session 0. They're not going to die.
Death is also an interesting concept, like we can talk about. That is potentially something you want to discuss with your players, is whatever decision you have made on how death is going to work in this system. I typically make the decision that that players will tell me if their character is dead, and I don't actually care if their hit points say otherwise. We made that rule really early on in Shadowrun because Shadowrun is notoriously lethal, and for me as a storyteller, it is incredibly unsatisfying to have someone die for no reason. Yep. And I would rather characters say, my character is dead, and that have weight behind it, than being like, oh fuck, like I failed I'm dead.
Yeah.
Like I want there to be some feeling behind it, as opposed to no feeling. And subjecting it to a dice roll is not my favorite. But that's something that you can decide and should probably make explicit to your players.
Yeah, I think I'm actually going to write down, talk about death with the players, and figure out collaboratively how we want that to go.
Because there are ways, death is not the only way to generate stakes and concerns and problems. It's not the only way to make people feel bad. And like, if you care enough about your character, you should care if they get hurt and seriously hurt. But it is also a decision that is up to, I think, a group and a GM and players, and everyone wants to approach it differently, and different approaches will give you a very different feel.
Yeah. I also wrote down talk about death and loss of character control, because for me, that is something I find personally as a player to be incredibly problematic. There is nothing that bothers me on a more fundamental level than having control of my character wrested from me and used by a villain. And I don't even necessarily mean like having me strike another player in combat. Like, I mean in particular outside of combat, having the control of my character, having my agency completely taken away, is not something that I am comfortable with when I play. So I feel like that's a discussion that should be had and usually isn't.
I very much understand that. I always struggle a little bit with like mind control or body control powers that you often get. Like D&D is very persuasive. Like characters can become incapacitated and the dice can hate you and you can be stuck failing your save for hold person for turns. And there is just like there's no way out of it. And one, I find it can just be super boring as a player when the only thing you're able to do on your turn is attempt to make a saving throw and fail at it. And two, it can also be very frustrating when it means the GM suddenly gets control of your character and they start doing things that they wouldn't normally do, and you don't have a way out of it with, because of your character and the way that they're made and the way that they're built. And I've towed that line as a GM, and I try to ask for players' consent in those situations.
Exactly.
Or I make them short. It is a single turn. It is a single moment, and you're all going to succeed to get out of it on the next turn. I prefer to do something like you lose your action for one turn, as opposed to you're out for the entire fight.
Yeah. And I think that a lot of that can be controlled in building the NPCs. So I am not going to make a villain that constantly casts hold person. Now, if a player starts doing that, then we need to have a discussion about it. But, because let's face it, hold person is OP. Like, it's kind of OP. When it works, it's OP. But... anything that renders a character incapacitated in D&D is like instantly
OP. Yeah, with only a saving throw.
Really quick, answering some questions. Does resurrection exist? Yes. How will character death impact the streaming cast? It won't. They can make a new character if their character dies, but if they want to leave or we decide to go with somebody else, then whatever. Question, what if a player understands that I need to control their character? One, you don't. I'm going to say that right off. You don't. You don't have to. You were creating the story. You decide whether or not you need to, which means you don't need to. It's a matter of whether or not you want to. Second, have that conversation with them beforehand. If you feel narratively that is the way you need to go, then talk to the player about it.
So a good example, in Right Click this week, or the previous week, Frisk's character got kidnapped and abducted. And I was like, well, she's going to be out the following week. I need a reason why she is out. There needs to be some sort of stake to this, or maybe not. It could be whatever. And I was like, I have an idea for how she could leave and be gone for a session. That would give the character something to do. That would motivate them. And I sent her a message and I said, are you okay with your character getting captured? And she said yes. And so I went, okay, then I can make her fall unconscious. And she will also know that that's me giving her a way to not be there next week because she knows she's going to be out. And so that's where you get consent. And I didn't give her the specifics of how she was going to be captured, but like in that sense, she was like, I know that my character is not going to get out of this situation, so I am willing to rest to give that control of my character in essence to the GM. Like I had some times with like Tony and Janine that came up in Shadowrun. So I've had it happen, but it is, I think, beneficial to ask even with being vague if you don't want to spoil everything.
But the important takeaway is communicate. Pretend that you are all adults at the table and actually talk about things honestly and openly. And if they can't do that, then that's their problem. And maybe you should find some adults to play with instead.
So one of the things you should also do on Friday is create and it might be short, it may not be involved, but it's a really good thing to do up front is, I've heard it called different things, a whitelist, a blacklist, lines, palettes, whatever it is. But essentially a list of things you as a group are uncomfortable with, do not want to have in the show. Maybe it's torture, maybe it's sexual violence. Or it can be a spectrum. It can be like, I am okay with torture being a thing that happens, but I don't want us to describe it. I want that to be a thing that we pull the veil over, or fade to black on, and then we just get information. Or it could be, I don't want torture to happen at all. I am uncomfortable with that being a thing in this game. Lines and veils. I've had it described as lines and palettes, whitelists, blacklists, bunch of different things. And then on the flip side, also things that they really want to have in the game. I want shippable characters. I want emotional whatever, I want cats. Like things that they really want to have and things that they don't want to have, and then kind of the middle ground of like, we can try it and it might make me uncomfortable. But that relates to that piece of, they may all be, as characters or players, super comfortable with you controlling, mind control, and hold person. They may not care about that. But they may also have very strong feelings about it.
Yep.
I personally, like, one of my gray areas, I don't particularly like it, is PvP. I'm not generally interested in players fighting against each other.
Yep.
I will almost never encourage a dice roll off between two characters, and I will instead encourage them to act it out narratively. Which isn't to say that there can't be, and I love conflict between the characters, but I don't typically want things to divulge into a fist fight between two characters that we then have to roll out. I don't particularly care for like one character. This D&D, it's really common for a character to be like, I'm lying, I'm gonna roll insight against party characters. I just want you to decide. Do you believe them or not believe them based on what you know about your character? Are you playing a not super intelligent barbarian? Then you probably believe them. Are you playing a hyper intelligent wizard? Then you probably think that they're lying. And that's, I prefer that being a decision that you make as a character, or as a player for your character, as opposed to being like, I'm gonna roll against my insight against your deception. But that's my personal preference.
Yeah, and I tend to generally agree. I think that I actually think that that example of are they lying? I don't know. Or the character doesn't know whether somebody is lying, and rolling that deception versus perception or persuasion or whatever, I feel like is a good way to resolve something that is easily simplified by that. Because some people are, like, you can build a character that is incredibly good at telling whether or not somebody's lying, and a character that is incredibly good at lying. I am not good at lying. So you might be, as a person, good at telling whether or not somebody's lying, and or bad at it, and I might be a terrible liar, and your character wouldn't necessarily know, but you know, or whatever. So I feel like that is a useful case of the roles, but I do feel like the game should be collaborative, and so having PvP, having players that don't get along with each other so much that it becomes problematic is not a good thing.
And again, this is entirely where it can be a personal preference for you and the group. Yeah. I have a preference of, I don't generally like players to roll against each other at all.
Yeah.
But it is 100% okay for that to be a tool that you still want to be able to use in your game.
Yeah.
That's your prerogative and the choice that you get to make, and you as a group get to make.
And I think that I would draw that line at, say, combat, for example. If somebody's like, I'm going to hit him, I'm going to be like, you two have to decide how this plays out. Do you get into a full fist fight? Do you take the punch? Do you, like, we're not going to roll out and figure out, resolve combat with dice when players get into a brawl with each other. That shouldn't be something that happens, I feel.
So Trooper gave a really good succinct description of lines and veils, which is lines are things that players and the GM that the group doesn't want crossed in the game, so just things you do not want to have. And veils are things that you don't mind happening, but you don't want described in detail. So the example that he then gave was sex is something that he's comfortable having in a game, but he wants it to be veiled.
Yep.
So like it happens, but you're not going to describe it in detail. You fade to black, you pull down the screen. But sexual assault is generally a line. Like that's just not something that he wants to have in his game. And that's a really useful tool to have in a pre-meeting to get everybody on the same page.
Yep.
I knew there was something else important you needed to talk about, and now we remembered it. Anything else? You got your list, things to talk about, death, lines and palettes, blacklist, whitelist, whatever you want to call it, guidelines for character creation, and then the information you're going to send them up front. And I think that gives you a pretty
solid start.
Pretty solid start. It's kind of like some of the stuff we talked about in the first episode of Manner of Speaking. They give you a whole list of things to discuss as a group. Some of those things you may want to give them is some of the tone for the world. She did write it in her notes, Iffy. She did. It's an open note test, by the way.
I don't even take notes, and I wrote it down, okay?
You may want to also touch on things of like how similar is it to modern day social political norms like gender and race and sexuality, religion and whatever else kind of falls into those sorts of categories. And you don't necessarily have to have all of that information up front, but given that it is typical for fantasy settings to be vaguely historical, and yet also somehow kind of modern with their social political norms, you may just want to give them some context for what those look like. Can a person of any gender be anything that they want to be? That may be variable based on the culture that they come from, but overall, what's the sort of average expectation of the world? Also, this class is recorded. So
yeah.
you can take notes and watch it back.
It's true.
It'll be a full open note, open book, open VOD test. And that kind of fits into your lines and palettes and veils. I think those are probably all the main things that I would say talking about. Let's move on to maps. What's your map? Did you sketch one for me? Show me. Show me your map. Okay, I'll eat my homework.
One of those is for me. But...
Oh, well, I was going to eat both of them. You're not. This is my homework.
Well, then I'm not showing you my map.
Fine. Okay.
Oh, God. It got squished.
Oh, no.
I'm sorry, teacher. Gibson ate my homework. He's big enough. He could. It did get kind of blurry.
Okay.
This is the rough draft that I drew while doing two other things at the same time.
Oh! Can someone show me what happened on stream? I don't even know how that fell out of my hand.
You didn't get it on me, though, somehow. So, there's that. Oh, goodness. Oh, dear. This is not going to go well. This is not... Oh, dear.
I think I just rolled a 1 on eating a cupcake.
How do you roll a 1 on eating a cupcake?
I took klutzy. That's a character trait.
All right, I'm going to have to wash that later. It's fine. It's fine. Everything is fine, but now I want my cupcake.
It's in there. Mine's the one that went everywhere.
Do any of you want to have any connections between your characters? Do any of you want to be related, very childhood friends? Yeah, we kind of covered that, Trooper. And world description includes some basic family law, like how inheritance works.
I'm gonna take this.
Maybe.
No need to throw it away like that, Lauren. Yeah.
It was terrible.
It's actually, I had them earlier. It's pretty good. The cupcakes aren't particularly sweet. It's more like a muffin, but the frosting is definitely sweet.
Okay.
Character trait, clumsy. Aww.
I don't think you guys know. I'm super klutzy. Oh my god, so yesterday I was playing D&D, and I rolled with advantage. 2 nat 1s. I rolled 6 times.
Talk about a waste of advantage.
I rolled
harsh.
6 times, and in 6 rolls I got 3 1s.
Wow.
Yep.
Ow.
It was really rough.
Yeah. And that is, we were having a conversation at one point about different systems, or somebody was having a conversation about different systems, and the spread on a D20 system being pretty brutal. But
Oh, super brutal. Especially at low levels, because the die roll is going to have the biggest impact on whether or not a character succeeds or fails. Up until you're kind of around level like 8 or 9, I think. Because you get a 20-point swing on a die roll, but like at a low level first level character, you're like lucky if you're adding 4 to a roll. Like,
I'm almost tempted to do RP points. And when I was younger and playing with my brother, we had RP points, role-playing points. So when you have a good character moment, you get... They're basically... yeah,
Drama
whatever.
points.
Yeah, drama points. Yeah, they're basically drama points. And we didn't use them that way, but I really, that is the one thing about that system, the system that Buffy the Vampire Slayer and Angel use, that is the one thing that I really like about that system, is drama points. But I liked it when I guested, was right before he changed it to what the actual rule is, which is you have to decide beforehand. Yeah. I like it better if you can say, no, you know what? That's when I want to use it. That roll was really important to me, and I want to add that plus 10 right now. And that makes it a success. Great. Good to go. And I may try and add on something like that to allow the players to narratively be like, no, you know what? That moment was really, really important to my character.
one of the things I've thought about doing, although it wouldn't necessarily help, but it would reduce some of the swinginess, is if you had 2d10 as opposed to a d20.
Yeah.
I mean, you'd be changing a lot of the feeling of the system, but anyway.
And it pulls it a lot more. Anyway.
We're not here to talk about that. Maps. We're going to talk about maps. And whether or not, the first question is, do you need to have maps? No, you do not. But sometimes... Just trying to do that, like, the fake paper tear. Didn't work. Oh, they're not allowed to see it?
I'm embarrassed. It's ugly.
It's fine. Let me show
As
you
an
my
artist, it is ugly. It is ugly as fluff, and you know why? Because I was like, whatever. In as far as it was more about laying out, okay, this is what I want here, this is what I want over here, and that, because I know that when I do a more refined version, I'm going to be doing it digitally, but I didn't have my drawing tablet with me, so it was really, really just kind of a, that's a mountain, 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 that's a swamp.
So, one of the things I would say is that, I was just reading Arguing Paradoxes, I'm like, who has an 18 in their primary stat at level 1?
It can be done.
Yeah.
That's something that I actually need to decide, how we're generating stats.
My go-to is normally, I let them roll, and if they don't, I let them do it once. If the spread's really terrible, then I just let them take the array.
That makes sense.
That's normally my go-to. I'm like, you can take the array, or you can see if you can do better by rolling. And sometimes better by rolling means they get one that's an 18 and one that's like a 6, and they're like, I want that. But it gives them the opportunity. That's my personal thing, because I'm like,
yeah. If
it's really shitty, just take the array. If you really like it, then, if you really want to take the risk. And I did the same thing with Stars Without Number.
Imp in my head, mostly fantasy low-tech, but some magic punk.
or fey punk, as I call it.
Sorry, I forgot to judge your cupcake homework. Because I was looking at the other one. The
Cupcake trainer, thank you for that donation for a few cupcake eating classes to improve the cupcake eating skill. So how was the cupcake?
So, I don't know if you know, but there was this one time I was baking cupcakes with the geeky hostess on stream, and I had a whole tray of cupcakes, and I like stumbled, and the entire tray of cupcakes landed on the floor.
Yeah. Yeah.
So this is not the first time I've dropped a cupcake on stream. This is in fact comparatively fewer.
Okay.
Whoever donated that's my hero. Aw.
I will clean your sofa.
We'll figure it out. It's fine. We'll figure it out.
The floor cakes. We saved 4 of them and
I
decorated
spilled
them.
tea on myself earlier, so on my seat, and then it got on my pants. So
Oh,
I'm
no.
worried that it's gonna stain, but it's fine.
It's fine. Lauren Cupcake Murder. So grade my cupcake, please.
So, sorry, let me channel my inner Mary Berry. It was scrummy. The flavor was absolutely lovely, but, you know, the consistency of the frosting was a little bit too runny. Perhaps...
More than a little.
Yes,
Yeah.
perhaps, you improved the consistency of it, but it was a very good bake, nice, light and fluffy, not overbaked, not underbaked. And, I would definitely eat another one again, but, decoration is lacking.
Yeah, so I actually told Lauren before the show that they wrote the frosting recipe, they wrote it poorly, and we talked about this on my stream too. Like, if you are going to have somebody set something aside, say, set aside, and then don't follow it up with something that says, add ingredient. Right? I mean, come on. The frosting totally didn't happen, but I learned a lot, and that was the important thing.
Like, the frosting is a very good flavor,
Yeah.
just the wrong consistency.
Yep. Yep.
So now that I've judged your homework, the other part of your homework, which I wasn't actually anticipating you having done. So,
tweet it at Lauren.
Rude. I was going to drop your cupcake, but I should probably clean it.
No, whatever.
So my feeling is on maps, and I have done games entirely without maps, and I have done detailed maps prior to starting. Generally, if you're making a map, it should serve a purpose, whatever that purpose is to you. When I started Shadowrun, it would make very detailed floor plans of like everywhere that they were breaking into, and I was like, there are like 17 bajillion rooms on this that they're never going to. And then they would like take forever to get there because I was like, well, now there's like 3 more doors in their way because I gave them the map. So instead, I would draw a map for myself and then not give them the map. That being said, in situations where there's a lot going on, having a visual cue can be helpful for people to remind themselves of where they are. There are technical challenges with having visual maps present during streams because often they're not on screen, so you still need to remind people to like describe it, which is why I tend to not use them at all.
I want to, like, behind the scenes stuff, production wise, I want to get to a point where we can have a map camera and like get some nice maps and things that will be wonderful visuals. We gotta get better cameras first. So.
But in terms of world maps, if I'm making a brand new world that I think the players are going to spend any amount of time in, then I will tend to make some sort of visual map for it. And I've done that for both campaigns where I had some sort of kind of large world. I don't do it with Leviathan because I don't want to make a map for every planet that they're going to. But I have a rough galaxy map concept in my mind of like where they are in relation to Earth, which is pretty big, but it's also fucking huge because it's a galaxy. So I don't need to be super specific. So I'm going to show you my maps. 2 maps that I have made.
So bacon, the flavor is good, just as Lauren said. The flavor is good of the frosting, but the consistency is all wrong because the entire chemical process of it from start to finish was wrong because I added the sugar to the raspberry, and it doesn't come up with the right consistency if you do that. So, yeah, flavor is good, consistency all wrong.
So, this is first. We're gonna go with the old one. I can find it. Just dug out my old notes. Oh, don't do that. This is an original. Where's my color? Oh, I never colored this one in. So this was a map that I made a long time ago. This was for my very first D&D campaign, and it is an entire continent, and the entire campaign took place here, for the most part. In this like started here, but the concept for this campaign is that they had access to a trans-dimensional multi-temporal portal. It was basically Stargate, and they could go anywhere with it. And so they would end up kind of all over the place. So I wanted to have some concept of essentially any sort of climate that I would want to send them to or feature or something like that. I could place it vaguely in a world and know what it might look like. So fun fact, you were describing how you made your map. Mine was a flipped version of Asia and Europe on its side. And then I kind of very loosely used where the various climates for that would be, but then rotated it based off of what would happen if you had a north-south axis. So like really cold in the south, and then this was roughly the equator. And so there's a whole planet that was undiscovered that I didn't have. But I used this because for me there were some cultural pieces that I created out of it. So like the elves they lived in the forest, they had been kicked out by this empire, and that was like the back history of the world. And so I needed like setups for where would these locations be. If you were an elf, where would you be coming from? I also liked that I had a very vague concept of what each of these cultures might look like, but if I had a player who was like, I want to be from this sort of culture, I could be like, you're probably from here, and then they could essentially fill in the rest of the details. So this one was very large. And then I made a second map which specified any of the places that they were going to in that main country that we were based out of, so I just zoomed in on it, and then I placed like the 3 major cities. So there's not necessarily anything wrong with making bigger or smaller maps. I tend to make them big. Similarly, this is the one from Skywatch, which, let's be real, I just made even bigger. It doesn't fit on a single sheet of paper. It might be too big, is the conclusion that I came to. So this one was the map I made for Skywatch. So, it was basically, again, I laid down where the main geographic regions were. I didn't really have countries in this one so much. I just wanted to think about what the terrain was like because it made it easier to know where things were.
Now that I'm done chewing, I should point out that the camera doesn't have autofocus turned on. Okay.
I can tell. I'm just like, you're getting the blurry image of this map, and that's all they need. And
I never focused it on us because I couldn't, because you weren't here and I was over there. So. No, that's okay. I'm just saying, it's reasonably in focus, but if we're not perfectly, sorry.
So when I approach making maps on this scale, I try and use Earth sort of analogies in terms of where geographical features would be. Mm-hmm. I like to think about it from a climate perspective, so as opposed to necessarily a country perspective, because then it also gives you some guidelines for culture, like what would a culture look like if it's formed in the desert of this continent as opposed to on a coastal city. And I needed somewhere, like I needed a port town. I was like, okay, I can have jungles here. And in this campaign, they literally never left this section. But I had a player who was like, I want to be from, because they were coming together from multiple places. I was like a player who wanted to be from a like weird forest community. And I was like, cool, you're going to be from this forest over here. Because I was like, do you want to be a jungle forest or a non-jungle forest? And they're like, non-jungle forest. So I could say where they were from. And then another player was like, I want to be from like a Mediterranean sort of culture. And I'm like, well, climate-wise, that would probably be over here. So it let me... and I can show you how I make maps, because it's actually not that hard. It's just, you basically do the shaky line. But
And accept that it won't look perfect. That's the tricky part. Being okay with it not being perfect.
So my initial map, I was like, I can tell you where the tectonic plates are and what type of tectonic plate they are because I'm a nerd like that. But
as much as I would love to get that into the world building aspect, I just can't.
You don't need to.
I just can't.
The only reason I do that is because it's a way that I think about geography. There's absolutely and utterly no reason why you need to do that. The only reason I do that is because that's a way for me to be like, I have a blank page, where would mountains be? I'm going to be like, there's a fault line here, mountains go this way.
Yep.
And that's the only reason. I was like, why would there be an entire like mountain section here? 2 plates are doing this.
Yep.
And so that's a thing for me. It is also okay to have entirely imaginary maps and to not have a physical map. My players barely looked at these. I use it as an organizational tool for myself. They, as detailed as they appear to be, they also still remain maps of requirement. So functionally, all I have placed is the things my players have asked for, and then anything that I need as it emerges.
Now, the trick with that is if you were doing a streamed show, the players aren't the only one asking for these things. The viewer is going to ask for them as well. So, manage your priorities.
Yeah, and that's that's an important piece. So I can give people this map and say like this is roughly what it looks like, and I can point to where on this map the main city that the campaign takes place in, and then as new cities appear, they pop up on this map. But otherwise, it is empty until I need it to be filled, which is also. There is no real wrong or right way to approach maps, but for the type of story you've told, for a lot of the things you've talked about your world where magic is dependent on the location of this one city, you kind of need to have a map so you can have a vague concept of how close or how far away are the players to this city.
Yeah.
And you can play with that. So what have you laid down for your map? Please describe this to me.
There's some jungle over here. What do you mean explain it to you?
So I can look at this.
Okay.
But what are some of the goals that you wanted to do with your map? Like what sort of concept were you going for?
Well, like I was saying before, the idea being that I understand the climates and geography of the U.S. pretty well. It's kind of vaguely a blob shaped kind of vaguely like the U.S., but not. And so I used that as a basis for being like, well, okay, you look at Louisiana all the way through to Florida, and that's all swamp. So, excuse me. Even if Florida was islands instead of swamp, there'd still probably be some swamp over here and over here, and some tropical woods here and here. I guess those are more temperate woods. I don't know. It's rough draft again, because there need to be some temperate woods. Oh, no, that's what it was. I pretty much just assumed there were woods just about everywhere, because there are, or were, before we got rid of most of them, except specific plains. Most hilly areas have lots of woods. So
if you were going to tell me...
This isn't that detailed that I worried about,
what sort of... so it sounds like you kind of took a climate approach to it, where you're like, here's the types of climates that I want to have, and they're going to be largely clustered together.
Yeah.
And it conceptually seems like you want most climates to be on this map, except maybe rainforest and desert, or are those things that you also...
I don't have desert on there.
Okay.
The forest that's down here is pretty rainforesty.
Okay.
At least that was the intent. As it goes south of basically where Florida would be, that's pretty much rainforest. So there is some rainforest. That's where the elves live.
Good.
That's right, tropical elves.
Imp, feel free to link that in the Discord. There's actually a lot, and I'll dig up some of the methods that I've used. There's a lot of tools out there that will randomly generate maps for you. Like, there is absolutely and utterly no reason that you need to do this on your own. Oh, that's the fun fact. The map that I made for Skywatch, the continent.
It's not that there's no desert in this world. There's no desert on this map. It's different.
This was based off of, very, very loosely, the reason I called the continent Cassini, or the map Cassini, is, and I looked at an XKCD for this, it's what happened, what would Earth look like if we rotated our equator 90 degrees. 90 degrees. And so it's the Earth, very roughly the Earth rotated. So I enjoy doing stuff like that. So like taking the U.S. map, one that you're familiar with, and then fucking with it is super fun.
I should also point out it's the eastern U.S. up to basically the Rocky Mountains. Because, as we mentioned, I think we mentioned it last week, there is a city that is time-locked. And there's like basically a magic dome in place over it that you can't get into and you can't get out of. And that was basically the main pass through those mountains that was reasonably easily traversed, and it is gone now. So that was part of where I started, is it's like, well, okay, if I want this city being locked to cut off a portion of the world, how is that going to happen? And it's like, well, it's not going to be the mountains we had on the East Coast. It's going to be the mountains that we have out here. It's going to be that massive snow-capped peaks that, dwarf mountains back home. And, thinking back on like Oregon Trail and things like that, there were very few passages through the mountains that they could take, and they were all treacherous. So if you take the best one of those, trade's not happening between those two places. So that was kind of where I started with it, and wanting a great big frozen north. So I think that this is that the polar ice caps are a bit bigger in this world than they are on Earth, for example. So that there is a great big frozen north, and there can be all sorts of great big frozen people up there. Is the mapped area the entire world, the entire known world, or just the relevant world? Just the relevant world.
And that's also normally the approach that I would take.
And not even all of that, I would say.
I like known world, relevant world is great to have. You can also have the maximum amount of world in which the players would be familiar, and then kind of everything else being the like in my mind, in the long continent I have, I'm like, there are other continents on this planet, but no one's been to them. Or if someone has been to them, it's like, whoa, they've been to this, like, this other side of the world. What is this person? Because I sort of imagine that thing of like traversing an entire globe would be difficult. In the other one, I'm like, these are probably the two major continents. Most of the rest of the world is going to be like maybe islands or water, but like people know that it exists, but it's not common to have traveled there. And I mostly did that because in that world, their airships existed. And so I was like, okay, well, if airships existed, then the amount of distance someone could have traveled is suddenly increased. So knowing that what you've said is that like most distance travel is going to be on horseback.
Most of it, yeah. Or ship.
And so your size and scale is going to be comparatively smaller. So it looks like you're kind of aiming for like half of a continent.
Pretty
like,
much,
bigger than a country, but
yeah.
Smaller. Like, I say a country because the U.S. is fucking huge. Bigger than a European country, but smaller than the continent of the United States.
Yes. Yeah, because even basically Canada is Canada in this. The equivalent of Canada is the frozen north. I just kind of, because I haven't been that far north, I just kind of was like, okay, let's move the polar ice caps down and just make everything above what I know frozen, which isn't too far from the truth if you go back a few hundred years.
Also, important question: are elves going to be fair-skinned, or are they going to be really tan? If they're from a tropical jungle.
The surface elves are going to be fairly tanned and fairly tanned to darker, with sun-bleached hair to darker. That's the plan.
Nice.
Emphasis on the surface elves.
The surface elves. I like that that's the thing that you're stipulating.
Well, drow elves are incredibly problematic.
Yes. Yes,
on
they
a
are.
variety of levels, and so they will not exist as written in their incredibly problematic fashion in my world, but they'll still exist. They're just going to be totally different.
I'm with you on that.
Like, the Underdark will still be a thing, it just won't be the same thing. And it'll probably be called something else. City frozen in time is always fun. Well, not really. I mean, they're not really doing much of anything right now.
That you know of. Okay, so...
well, I mean, I know all. I'm the GM.
Fair enough.
That you all know.
That I know of.
So anyway,
Plains, mountains. Okay, so I would say, looking at the version that you've got, one of the big things,
Swarthy elves.
the Magic City looks like it's Coastal City, right?
Yep.
This is her map. She doesn't want you to see it. You can barely see it anyway.
I know, because I sketch when I'm sketching, and all I had was a mechanical pencil too, so it was the worst. I couldn't even use it.
I love how you're like,
better
this is the worst,
pencil.
and I'm like, that's like 90% of all of these maps that I made were sketched by hand. So a couple of things that that you might want to think about putting on there, especially if you're saying travel like by horse and by water, are there major rivers? Because
There's a couple on there.
Yeah. So identifying where your kind of major rivers would be, and also like once you lay down, you have your Magic City. Do you have any other cities that you're thinking of as being particularly important or relevant?
Yes, actually, there are some on the map right now. In fact, there's where this river splits and the hills meet the mountains. There's at that split, and in fact, I haven't decided if there's like dramatic waterfalls or if it goes underground for a while. Maybe there's dramatic waterfalls under. Oh, I really like that. Like in the entry to the city, you walk into this great dwarven
Dramatic
gnomish
waterfall.
city, and there's like this massive entryway with this roaring, gargantuan waterfall coming down, pouring down, possibly even generating some power.
Alyssa, your question about edgelord problematic or seriously problematic? Seriously problematic because they are canonically all dark-skinned and also canonically all evil. And that is a trope that is repeated way too frequently in most fantasy settings. I'm looking at you, Lord of the Rings.
Never mind the fact that they're a matriarchal society that is evil and oppressive and enslaving and yeah. No, it's seriously a problem. Like there's a lot of crap that's wrong with it. So, yeah.
In
fact, that is part of the reason that elves in my world are a matriarchal society in general, is to show a different way of doing it. It isn't a mirror of patriarchy, and there isn't in slavery. It's much more equal. It's just that they happen to follow a matriarchal lineage and be more focused on the female side of it than the male. But that's a huge part of why. To be like,
It makes sense.
because it's not this. So yeah.
Laying down, you've got a couple of major cities, things like major rivers. Thinking about the major cities, that would probably come with it a couple of major roadways that might exist, the main road, the highway.
That I haven't really worked on yet.
So,
but I started thinking about it and mapping out, like I did some research on how long it took to get from Boston to New York City by horse, because this is, again, a distance that I'm very familiar with. I've driven it many, many times. So it gives me a concept of apparently it was about 6.5 days in 1750-ish.
That seems like a good... I mean,
It was about a
someone
week.
points out riverboats powered by magic.
It was about a week by carriage-ish.
Yeah, it's true. Carriages would probably take longer than horses. So, roads are good to be informed after you have your major cities because typically your well-traveled roads are going to be between your major cities.
Yep.
And maybe something else. If you were to give me a concept of scale on how big you're imagining this space to be, like, what can you relate it to, like, American states?
This is the U.S. East of the Rockies.
Okay, so very large scale.
Yes, and it needs to, something that I realized as I was drawing it is I'm like, okay, this needs to be stretched and maybe add some stuff in, and this needs to be stretched. And
because based on...
That's part of
based on
why I
that-
emphasize how much of a rough draft this is
Yeah.
because when I was drawing it, I was like, okay, here's the issue. There's no desert, for example. Apparently I have to have that somewhere. Maybe I'll just work a...
You don't have to, but there are deserts in the United States.
No, I know. I just blocked it out
Yeah.
because I hated it so much.
Especially when you
that-
go
yeah.
to the south. Because one of the things, if you're thinking this is the U.S., like,
Yeah,
you have a
where
very
I have the
condensed
tropical
area. You
I shouldn't
don't
say
have
this is
anything.
the U.S. This is North America,
North America, yes.
but on the eastern side of the mountains.
So if we pictured this here, this part would probably get stretched out, and your desert would end up essentially kind of in the rain shadow of the mountains, and in the south, because that's where the air would dry out. Your Arizona sort of desert, your Utah. And it's not to say that you can't have it, but I generally find in a campaign when you're setting up a map, have as many climates as you can, because that's more fun.
Yeah.
Where else will you find your desert animals but in the desert? You know, your long buried sandy ruins are going to be in the desert.
Well,
Or not, but you know, you have those sorts of opportunities because you have the climates.
will there be Fantasy Canada? Yes, it's full of frost giants, Goliaths, and other frozen things.
I would probably recommend
Now
would you
Now I'm
picture-
gonna have the Goliath accent be Canadian.
a boot.
I'd like to read, Jay.
I don't know about that. Sorry.
Sorry.
The Giants
Oh my
just
goodness.
apologize a lot.
Yes. Oh, sorry, I didn't
Dire
mean to step
beavers,
on you.
eh? Dire beavers.
Oh,
And giant moose, because that's just how big moose actually are.
Well, yeah, that's what the Goliaths ride into battle, is giant moose. Or,
Yes.
regular-sized moose.
Yeah.
Well-fed, regular-sized moose.
Giant elk.
Yeah.
I miss giant elk.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, but I'd kind of like to rage. Wait, no, that was a little too Scottish. I'll work on my Canadian, all right? I'm sorry. Sorry, I will work on my Canadian.
So I would look here and kind of pick apart like
Please.
where
Sorry.
where you want to stretch out things. I would also consider you have these two really big important cities. Maybe worth having one or two more, so you kind of have like some waypoints.
You maybe just haven't seen them.
I probably haven't seen them. You have other cities.
I do need to actually add a bit more, like even if they're not like major cities. There's one up here that is on the side of a cliff.
Nice.
With like
Very
lifts and
nice.
stuff like that. Yeah. And then there'll be one or two in the Elven area, and there'll probably be, if not cities, a bunch of different towns and coastal villages in the islands. So yeah, it does need more cities, but
Where's their starting city going to be?
that is what I said that I hadn't figured out.
Okay.
Yeah.
So based on what you
I'm
said,
sitting here like,
that
oh,
it's
shoot, I forgot
mining.
to figure out where that was.
mining is
Yes.
probably going to put it near mountains
Or hills.
or hills. So you're probably not going to be in the tropical or the swamp area. You're probably going to be a little bit farther north. maybe near the mountains, maybe near the plains, kind of where mountains turn into hills before they become plains.
Yeah.
Likely, if it is a city of a substantial kind, it's going to be near a river or near an offshoot of a river so that they can ship things on water because it's more efficient. Not necessarily, but if it's a really small town, then maybe it's not going to be, and that it helps explain.
Yeah.
And that also gives
I
you
was
more
actually
direction,
thinking that is specifically why it's smaller, is because they can't get the stuff out of there as easily.
And then that also alternatively gives you direction that it is not near a river in terms of where it would be placed. And then you geographically, you also know how is it, are you thinking climate-wise? Is it going to be a warm place or a colder place? Is it going to be kind of fairly
what time
neutral?
of year is it going to be? Yeah. 'Cause that
Fantasy
controls a lot.
Midwest. So that gives you some potential direction. You have kind of your two sets of mountains. One would make them very, very far away from the city, the magic city. One would make them closer to it. Were you leaning towards them being close or far?
Midpoint, honestly.
Okay.
So it might actually end up being there's a lake there.
Yeah. And these kind of look like some of the hills.
Yeah.
So maybe it's kind of near the lake and near the hills.
That's kind of what I was thinking. Not on the lake, but near it. Perhaps maybe there is a lake city, and maybe it's between the dwarf gnome city and the lake city, and there's not a lot of traffic there because you know, I don't know, they have a lot of the same commodities or whatever. Maybe. When are the holidays in this world? I don't know. I haven't figured out who the holy people are yet.
Except for one.
Well, yeah. I mean, yeah, but yeah.
The Great Pastrius.
Yeah. The Great Pastrius. Yes, the Great Pastrius. Pastrius, I believe.
Pastrius.
It's Pastrius. That sounds like pastrami now.
No, I like Pastrius, though. But people call it Pastrius, and they're like, no,
Pastrius.
Pastrius.
It's mimosa, not mimosa.
And then it's the rise, the bake, and the holy crust.
I don't know. No, I haven't pumpkin. I have not figured out the prevalence of all of the different species, in part because I still haven't decided what all of the different species I want to have are. I did consider it a little bit. I didn't completely ignore it. Just like I know that there's a dwarf and gnome city there. I know that I've written on the map dwarves and a bunch of arrows. They live in the mountains. Most of their cities aren't surface cities. You have to be friends with the dwarves to get there. You have to go through the dwarf and gnomish city to be able to get to the other dwarven cities, or potentially through the cliff city, or potentially through the frozen north, or whatever. But the main way that people go there is through the dwarf and gnomish city. If they want dwarven goods, that's where you're going to go to get them.
And also, once you lay down your geography, knowing that you've tied elves and dwarves and presumably humans to kind of tethered them to some various locations, that you can use to improvise how likely it is they're going to meet someone. If they're further south, they're more likely to meet an elf. If they're further north, they're more likely to meet a dwarf. If they're in the middle, they're more likely to meet a human.
Everything else. Yeah.
Everything else. And, you know, you can be like, well, if I'm going to have dragonborns in this world, they're pretty few and far between, but the highest cluster of them are on the islands. Because lizards.
I was thinking perhaps that's who's on the other side of the mountains.
Yeah. And so then you would see more of them in mostly major cities, and they're really, like, uncommon and rare. Like, it's people who have crossed the mountains,
already
or
lived here before
lived
the
here.
pass got blocked and things like that.
And their offspring. So that, knowing your geography, you can use to improvise a lot of the placement of how likely it is without necessarily having a specific percentage. And that is one of the reasons in a setting like this, where you have very disparate races or species, I do recommend having a map, because it helps you place people and place the likelihood that you would meet someone. And like, it also helps me. I try and use it as a way to inform like how I might describe characters. Knowing if I am in a more southern, a warmer place, a place that gets more sunlight, people are going to have darker skin, because that's how skin works if they're humans. and presumably related to other cultures, as opposed to, but I can also then sit there and be like, well, are they always from this region or did they move to this region? And so like, there's no reason why you can't have people in different locations, but it is a way for me to spark my imagination when I need to describe an NPC, among other things.
Since it came up, if the main path through the mountains is the Timeless City, does that mean the dwarves are not in that mountain range, or do they not allow non-dwarves or traders to use their tunnels? There is a wasteland leading up to the Timeless City, as you put it. I actually really like that. And there were dwarves in those mountains, but nobody's been able to find them and get in touch with them because there's a wasteland that's full of like undead and other nasties in that area. So it is, somewhere that people might go if they're specifically looking for adventure, but it's not somewhere that you're going to go starting off. It's known to be a very dangerous territory, but it is known that beyond that, that's leading up to the Timeless City is not an easy path to even get there, to even study it. So
are pastry deities spell scrolls really just pastries or cookies or something you have to eat to cast? They all presumably have a material component. Nom 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 nom. Would you like this cupcake of healing?
Yes, I would. Awful and brilliant at the same time.
I don't know who, but I want one of the players to be a cleric or a paladin, and I want their deity to be Pastrius. Pastrius.
Oh, goodness. Pastry cleric feels very critical role. I could see that. I could definitely see that. But, Paladin Hulk, you didn't watch me on Mayhem and Misfits Season 2.
Are your cupcakes of healing gluten-free?
The wizards of the pastry god. No. I mean, they can be of the religion of the pastry god, sure, but that doesn't affect their magic in any way, shape, or form. Because they don't get it from Pastrius.
Cleric would, though.
For Theo, that's because I can't tell either.
Cool. I think we talked about a lot of good stuff.
Yeah.
We've talked about your map. Like, I would also say for the meeting on Friday, bring this version of it, and if you have time to make a different one, like, awesome. But this is a really good starting place. It gives me a lot of concept for what the world looks like, without feeling
misfits,
overwhelmed.
Non-mystics. No. Nothing so classy. Mayhem and Misfits. And I don't know. I think it's on YouTube. Yeah,
I think so.
I'm pretty sure it's on YouTube.
I think so. And you've got your list of things to talk about with the players for your first meeting. So today we discussed maps and meetings. I also very rarely do, like, city maps.
Pastry Warlock.
Unless the whole thing takes place in a city.
Sorry, what?
I would, like, my last sort of thought for maps is that I don't normally make them for small locations or, like, for anywhere they're not going to spend a significant amount of time. Yeah. The world, I feel like it has value because they're in the world the whole time. If they're in a town for one session, I'm like, the town has whatever I need it to have in it. So, Alchemist of the Pastry God, explosive cinnamon rolls. I feel like, wouldn't that be an infernal pact if you were a pastry warlock?
I think so. I don't think you actually can be a pastry warlock. I think you could be a pastrami warlock, but not a pastry warlock. Yeah, because warlocks are making contracts with basically infernal or
some other powerful
abyssal
entity.
Yeah.
who are generally not great entities, but I suppose you could do it with. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know if you can be a warlock with a good being.
There's
like, I think that would be interesting, and I'm not going to say it's not allowed.
There's
but,
abyssal. There is one. There's the the stellar one or something in Fey contracts. Like they're not inherently evil. There's some that aren't inherently good either. They're just sort of
that makes
neutral.
sense. Yeah. No. When you said Fey, I was like, okay, now I'm seeing it. Now I get it a bit more.
Like because I think you can have a Fey pact and like a star pact or something. So they're not. You're just making a pact with some particularly powerful other being that becomes the source of your magic. Celestial patron. So, much in the same way that I would argue being a cleric doesn't inherently mean you're good. Like, you could be a cleric of the Raven Queen, which is sort of not good nor bad. Like, so I think it's just a different relationship.
Now I'm fascinated by the concept of making a pact with the Fae. I'm like, ooh.
That's pretty cool. I think I looked at the Fae pact.
Oh,
some of the Warlock pacts are pretty fun.
Yeah.
Devil's Food Cake Warlock.
So I think that's
anyway,
about
that's
it.
a good place to
today.
wrap.
Yeah. You all can keep thinking about pastries and your various worships of them. It's fine. Enjoy. The flavor of it is good, but the consistency, ugh. All right.
It looks like brains.
So that's what we've got. But we're going to be back in 3 hours for High School Royale, the 4th episode tonight. High School Royale with you as a player and Steph as a player and Marcus as a player and Jamie as a player and Sarah as a player and Claudia as a GM. It's chaos. It's chaos.
How dare you?
How dare I what? It is in fact chaos.
You're not wrong.
I don't think you can even debate that. So anyway, thank you all very, very much for hanging out with us today. Thank you very, very much for the donations that came through. Because we don't have our Friday show, it's all on tonight. Paying everybody for tonight is all on tonight. So thank you very, very much for those. That does help us keep the lights on and keep streaming. And eventually, maybe someday, we'll have a full lineup of shows so we can tell you what the Star Trek related show idea is. That's all I got. Bye, guys!